I'm delighted to have with me today Dr. Shelley Reynolds from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and we are going to be talking all things charting the life course and charting the life course nexus. So for those of you who know, and it should be all of you by now, I am a big devotee. Shelley calls me a super participant, which I believe entitles me to a cape pretty soon here. So I am very invested in these tools because I think they really provide great resources based on great principles for you and for your family members with disabilities. So I'm glad you're here today. I think maybe what I'd like to do to start is have you tell everybody a little bit about your journey, about who you are, what drew you to all this work, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. So I'm Shelley Reynolds. If I haven't met you guys, it's nice to meet you virtually, those of you that are attending this. I am somebody that works at the University of Missouri, Kansas City Institute for Human Development, and I am celebrating my 24th anniversary here at this organization. I started out when I was, 5 or 6 years old. I actually started out here when I was completing my master's in occupational therapy. And my journey really started when I was very young, and my family decided to adopt a child with developmental disabilities who is now my lifelong brother. And so as a sibling, I've grown up in the disability community as an advocate and a friend, a peer, and just have experienced disability from a very personal level. I had the opportunity to start working at the university in Kansas City, which is what we call a University Center of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, where I originally started supporting the self-advocacy movement in Missouri, so People First of Missouri. And that opportunity then expanded itself to directing our Missouri Family to Family Resource Center. And it was really, I would say, my lived experience as a sibling, my experiences that I was honored and privileged to have working side by side with individuals with disabilities or self-advocates, and then able to really understand from a policy perspective and a practice perspective on how to support families. That really gave, kind of grounded me in moving in towards the direction of charting the life course. So I don't know if you want me to carry on that journey from there.
Well, I do want to talk a little bit more about it because I think it's important for families to know a couple things. One, that it came from a gathering of families trying to figure out how can we identify best practices and move those forward. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. But I'd also I think sometimes some of the folks think that charting the life course is about these pieces of paper that we introduce. So if you could just talk about kind of a little bit more about the principles and how they guide the work, I think that's a good starting place for us.
Yeah, it's interesting for me over the years when you start interacting and learning more about our field and learning more about best practices and really recognizing that our field is a civil rights movement. And I'm constantly reminding people that whether you're a direct support professional or whether you are a family member or whether you are a special ed teacher or a gen ed teacher, everything you do to support a person with a disability is really a civil rights movement in terms of how are we supporting them to have the good life in the community. And so when I start thinking about the underpinnings of life course framework, it's really about that. It's about how are we helping people to have vision, have whether you have a disability or not, it's self-determination, advocating for yourself, having friends, social capital, sort of the underpinnings of really what helps people to have the life that they want. And where Life Course really came from was, a long time ago, when I, first started working in family to family, I just remember just listening to families and, everybody's sort of solution, whether it's a brand new family leader or whether it's a professional, to how do we help families navigate life for services everybody's first solution was make a directory. And it used to drive me absolutely insane.
Oh my gosh, I've got a lot of old ancient directories gathered and dust in my office. Let me just say.
Yeah, and I would always say, we don't need another directory. What we really need is something that really can help people see possibility, because you don't know what you don't know. And I always said, what if remember back in the day when you were doing research and you would use an encyclopedia. Like, it didn't have every single fact about something, but you open up a page and you could research an elephant and it gave you a paragraph to help you understand that concept or whatever it is you were looking for. And I always said, that's like families and people with disabilities, they just need possibilities. They need to understand what's possible out there. And so the framework kind of took all of these sort of approaches, and we about 10 years ago partnered with an organization, a national organization called the National Association for State Directors of Developmental Disability Services. And what that organization is, it's a membership organization for the directors of state developmental disability services. And we were charged on this federal grant with developing a national community of practice on supporting families. And the reason that we applied for this and received this grant was because, family support started in the 1990s, where legislation really started to say, we recognize the significant role that families play in the lives of their child with a disability. And in the 90s, there was a lot of funding and a lot of focus on that. But the outcome that was always the focus was, how are we preventing out-of-home services or institutional supports? And it was really geared at 0 to 18. And so this national community of practice, which a community of practice, people are like, what's a community of practice? It's gathering people to learn about a topic, whether it's policy or practices. And so we gathered 5 states together and began to start our work and recognize we need to have driving principles, like what connects us and what makes this community of practice different from other community of practices. So in Missouri, we had already begun thinking about the tools families need in terms of information, questions, and worked with stakeholders on that. And so kind of combining those 2 efforts together, we came up with what we call our principles. And I tell everybody, the life course framework, the tools are pretty cool because they're concrete and you can touch them and you might be able to fill them out and they can help you.
And they're really colorful.
And they're very colorful. But underpinning those are really 7 key principles that you use to think about really everything. So I could sit down with an individual and in my head, I'm constantly running through those principles and I never get a piece of paper out, or maybe I do choose to use them. But the cool part about those principles is that they're not disability principles, right? They're life principles, and I can use them with a person, I can use them with a family. I can sit down with a legislator and look at Medicaid waiver policy and use those principles to see if they're aligning their policies leaning towards to what we believe will bring around a good life.
And you're so right. I mean, everything about the way we deliver services now has this framework of these principles that has allowed us to really analyze our work in such a different way, from looking at our family workshops to make sure we're including all the different life domains in the work that we do, to looking at how we organize our information on our website. Absolutely everything. I was doing strategic planning with our children's department, and we were looking at the 3 buckets of information families need to be able to move forward towards the good life, and making sure that we could operationalize that and take action around that. So I'm going to tell you something. I've never told you this before, but I attribute it in many ways to the life course principles and tools. We do a survey every year, and we get a lot of these surveys back because they're contingent. Funding is contingent on receiving the survey. So we're really lucky. We get about 12 to 1,500 surveys back annually from families. And we've been asking them for years if they felt like they had enough knowledge to make decisions. And it's always the lowest scoring item. It's about 30 to 40% if we're lucky. Last year, it was almost 80%. And I did a happy dance and I thought, what has happened? And everybody looked at me and said, what do you mean, what has happened? We're using these different ideas and principles to organize things and giving people better information. So kudos to Life Course for helping us with that, because I really do think we are seeing the outcomes of that for families and for the people we support.
That's so awesome, and I like to tease my family and talk about them and use them as examples, and sometimes even, and I always said, I probably overgeneralize this, but in some ways as a family, you're a different type of problem solver, or right, like, or even a different point in your life. Like, so sometimes you sit down and you need the list of ideas. And other times you're like, I don't want the list because I don't want to be stymied by what only's on that list. And I think in the disability field, because we have been organized with traditional services, right? Traditional services of maybe group home or institutions or HAB centers or sheltered workshops. Like, in some ways, families like default to that being their only possibilities, and because they've never really thought about it, because why would you think about all those things? And I think too, so we have that happening where you're like, there's this world of unknown because I just don't know. And then you have this, what I always tell everybody is like, there's something that happens when you sit down to problem solve or plan around services for a person with a disability. And I think sometimes families all of a sudden feel inadequate, or they don't feel confident in their ability to problem solve. And for me, Life Course is about just reminding everybody, you know how to problem solve. You've problem solved your entire life. And these decisions are no different when you're sitting down to really dig into them and problem solve. And I love when I'm teaching somebody about Life Course and I'm just reminding them that you have the problem solving skills and ability, that this gives you a way to organize your thoughts or to remind you of stuff that you already know or know how to do, and I think that helps with decision making, right? Because it feels less overwhelming. And I'm a very visual person, as you can obviously tell. So I think in terms of shapes and colors, and like sometimes you need to be reminded how to do stuff. And so I love hearing that is what came out of those surveys, because it's more than did my staff use it for their person-centered plan. It's actually, how are we helping the people we're serving to make better decisions and be more confident in their decisions and see possibilities? So it needs all the layers, but that's the ultimate outcome. So that's awesome.
It really was exciting. I'm going to just go right to kind of a concrete here, because we're talking about problem solving. Can you give an example of how the principles help families and help individuals with disabilities problem solve? I want you to talk about the integrated support star.
Right.
We're going to just talk about a couple of the principles and tools. I think families sometimes see it up here, and I want them to see it really up close.
So this is lifecoursetools.com. And, I always tell people, if you're brand new to this website, go to the Life Course framework. I mean, that's what Sharon just kind of reference. Go to the framework, you learn about the key principles, because the key principles are the starting point. But if that's overwhelming to people, I always tell them, it's hard to tell them which one to start with, but true problem solving, I always start with the integrated support star. Use the star. And I use making dinner as an example, just because I like to make fun of myself because I don't cook at all. So that's the star. But I always tell people, you should always problem solve with 5 options. It doesn't matter whether I'm trying to figure out what I want to make for dinner, or if I'm trying to problem solve, what's housing support's going to look like for my adult son with a disability. And I always tell people, just think about the key issue in the middle of that star. And what I think we take for granted is that people know what to put in the middle of that star. And I think we have to spend more time really figuring out what the key issue is. Because when I'm first sitting down with a family, their minds go straight to services and they put services in the middle of the star. I need Medicaid waiver. I need this. I need that. And I'm like, hold on a second here. It's not about you needing something and solving that right away, but why do you need it? Let's dig into that. So, if you have, a child that needs supports from 4 to 6 because mom and dad both work, then that's what we put in the center of the star. We don't put in the center of the star, I need services. And so I want to use the cooking example really quick, just to make this basic for those of you that are new. But I always tell people, like, think about the star or the 5, your 5 fingers. And I'm always like, think about what you're personally bringing to the table. So I can kind of cook, not really well, pretty darn good at cooking eggs. After that, I'm really good at cleaning up the kitchen, and I'm really good at having an opinion about what we're eating. That's my personal strengths that I'm going to bring to dinner, right? When I move over to relationships, I am blessed with having a husband who is an incredible cook. And he's able to help us with dinner at night, right? But I can go over there to technology, and I can use my technology. Maybe I'm going to use Uber Eats, or maybe I'm going to look up an Instapot recipe, or, I go down to the community. Am I going somewhere in the community to eat? Maybe we decide we're going out to dinner. Or I even come over to eligibility specific support. So maybe I need support funding my nutrition and my food. And so do I need to go to a food pantry, or do I need, support and funding my grocery bill, or those types of things? And so I'm using that star to constantly problem solve. And so I can tell, like, when I sit down with a family, and I'm not even talking to them about anything else, I'm just like, you know what, are you sitting here thinking about dinner tonight? And you are sitting here problem solving how you're going to solve dinner tonight. So let's run through the star and get them comfortable with realizing you run through those 5 things all the time. And so, I start with that as an example, but then I also push professionals and say, we have become so focused on connecting people to specialized eligibility government supports. And there's nothing wrong with those supports, but why do we always start there? And how could we start from somewhere else? And so I tell people, I use transportation as a really great example. And, we have on our staff, Family to Family Resource Center staff. And I said to them, my expectations, whether you have a 5-minute information call or a 2-hour navigation call, my expectation is that whatever their key issues that the caller's calling about, is that you're offering 5 types of supports. You are problem solving beyond providing 1-800 number to some agency and then thinking you're done with that call. And so we push our behavior when we are helping to problem solve to say, let's run through that. And so I said, it might seem far-fetched to the caller that you're talking to, but start with that person's personal strength. So if they're calling and they're asking about transportation, the first thing that you need to do is kind of assess where that person is. Is this somebody who might drive one day? Or is this somebody who was driving and they shouldn't drive any longer? Is this somebody that's temporarily not driving? Is this somebody who can ride a bike? Is it somebody who could safely navigate their community walking or riding a bus or those sort of things? Like, let's really understand what they're bringing to the table. And I think this is so important, and it seems so intuitive, but when we try to help people, we usually forget that part of it. And we jump to, what can we bring to the table for them? What can we do for them? And we're not, and as if it's a one-time thing. Well, if a mom's calling about a 20-year-old asking about transportation is going to be an issue their entire life. So are we just meeting their immediate transportation need? Are we trying to build a skill set so they become more independent at whatever it is they're able to do related to transportation?
Yeah, I like that people think about the star now too, in terms of what have I got today and what can I build for tomorrow, which I think is so helpful because it's not just today, it's your whole life that you're moving towards. So that's really important too.
Well, it is. And you bring up some of the things a lot of people love, what we call our split star. And we actually write we have, so the star I brought up is just a template or a worksheet. And we have what's called a split star. So sometimes we write like, what do I have now? And what do I want? And we go around that star. But
I just have to do a shout out to the advocates that we work with that use this star because they love the star and they really are good with the split star and using it to plan forward for their coaching sessions, for their goals that they want to work on and all that kind of stuff. My favorite star I ever did, I had some young, actually not all young adults, adults of all ages, go out to Webster University where we were going to teach a class about problem solving, and we did the star, and I sent each of the people with disabilities who were with me went out and worked with a group of college students, and they told them what the center of their star was, and they all did a really good job of identifying something specific that they wanted. And my friend Dwayne wanted a girlfriend, and it was really fun to go all the way around the star and think about all the ways you could get a date and get a girlfriend. But the cool thing was about it was that when he came back and presented it, he could say, and this is the way I want to do it. And Dwayne was all in to have a wingman. So we knew we needed to get him a wingman to go out with him and talk up how great he was so that he could get the girl that he wanted.
Well, but so like using that story, what I tell people is like, you know, when we're making any decisions in our life, you don't just go sit in a room and make it completely independently by yourself, right? We're constantly like asking other people. Maybe it's very informally. We don't necessarily sit down and have a big person center planning meeting about this, or maybe you do. But to me, the star becomes this sort of way to get creative juices flowing, you know. And I think in our field sometimes we get stuck, like not on purpose, it's not intentional. Very good people get stuck, and so you either are used to always giving the same answer, or or how do you actually open it up to like what you just said of like other people being like, oh, I never thought about the wingman approach to dating, but that's great. I could put that under relationship. And then I'm less worried about them going out in the bars to themselves or what, you know, you start really kind of thinking about that. And like, to me, I tell people, because some people are like intimidated by the tools. I'm like, there's nothing to be intimidated by. You can use them however you want. There's like not necessarily a wrong way. There's a way that we've used them, but if you know, there's not a wrong place to put something, you know, but the idea is it's like, well, what if I put it under community and it's really eligibility specific? And I'm like, but did you write it down? Did it give you an idea? And so I think your example is really good because sometimes I'm using the star just to collect the ideas. So maybe I'm working with a group of people or one person and they don't even know that I'm actually kind of filling that star out so that when I'm done, I'm basically saying to them, here's a summary of what we talked about, organized in a really easy way for you to be able to do something with it. But I think more importantly, you were teaching that skill set unintentionally of like problem solving. And so whether it's a person with a disability or a family that you're working with, if you as a professional are using these concepts or these tools, it's more about that side-by-side approach. And then them saying, oh, wow, they were using that star to problem solve. So maybe the next time that person actually comes, having some of those ideas and they're sharing it with you. And I think that's the thing I love about Life Course. It's all about spreading it to other people. Like nobody owns this skill set. It's for everybody.
I think that is one of the most amazing things that you have given us is this platform where everybody can use it as they choose, and it just continues to grow and change as people use it and as they find new uses for it. And I'm curious if that was something you anticipated or if, You use a fancy word when you talk about that, iterative, which is like, ooh, I want to use that word in a sentence. But I mean, the fact that it's constantly evolving is such a cool piece of Life Course.
Well, so, I don't know. Partnerships are really important to me, and relationships are really important to me. And I also really I fundamentally believe that not any one person has all the answers, and that it's our collective, knowledge and experience and creativity that is going to continue to support not only people with disabilities, but really support our entire communities. And, what is really important to me, because a number of people are like, well, why do you have all your tools online? Why is this? And I go, do you know what our first principle is? Our first principle is the concept of awe. And this is about how are we living that principle, not only in terms of how are we giving people access to Life Course, but the idea is it's bringing together all of those different perspectives. And I think that that's really important. And I always tell people is I just put down some of the ideas on paper and talked about them. And then over the 10-year span, everybody else has helped to, using that big word, iteratively, which just means I learn from you, I build on this, we learn from each other, we keep going back and forth and back and forth. And it's, I think that that's why across the country, people really gravitate to this, because I always tell people, and it drives people crazy, it's not train the trainer thing. I'm not here to train you exactly how to problem solve with this. I'm here to teach you the concepts and the principles so that you can apply them in whatever way you want to apply them. And my dream is that then you want to share that back with me, because maybe it was an example or a target population we hadn't thought about, or maybe it's really you applied it to culture, or you applied, there's so many different ways to apply it. And it just helps us all continue to grow it together.
I want to ask, you talked about people learning how to use the tools and growing and how they change. What are some options for families who want to learn more about these tools?
Full disclosure, we never knew that this was going to become this. And so it's kind of, it's a really interesting, good dilemma that we're in right now about the questions and demands that we get from across the country and even the world, actually, where other countries are calling and saying, but do you have it in this language? And where's this? And why don't you have that? And it's hold on a second. You have to help us do these things. The things that are missing, you have to help us do. And one of the things that I am really, really interested in is how are we finding, again, that super participants or other people that are the conveyors of the information. So, it's not probably full scale yet, but in a lot of states and communities and counties, I could probably point you to the person who could sit down with you if you needed it at that level. But the other thing that we're doing is we recognize that pretty quickly we were developing a lot of capacity building stuff for that type of person, that professional, that practitioner that would help us spread that. And we've really started to focus over this last 6 months to a year of what do we need to do so that a family could come to a website or come to something and be able to navigate it themselves, not be as intimidated, not be as technical. And so on our website right now, it's got a lot of how-to videos. By going to the tools and seeing the how-to videos connected to them is a great way to get started. And one of the pages, it seems a lot of people skip on our website, and so we're talking about moving this around or whatever, is a page, and I should have pulled it back up, that actually says family perspective tools. And it's each of the tools. And, sometimes it's about opening them up and just almost treating it like it's a worksheet and kind of following along and figuring out how you can just even answer the questions as if it's a worksheet. But then there's those how-to videos that
open it up on my page. So up here under Life Course Library and Foundational Tools, you go to Family Perspectives.
Yes. And that will take you to what I would consider the kit of tools. And and I also think this part's really cool. I'm really excited about seeing this get built out over the next couple of years, is that these tools specifically say the phrase family perspective on there, because I am watching our field talk about person-centered supports and person-centered planning. And if we really truly are doing person-centered planning, that's the information that the person's providing to us, whatever form of communication that they use. But there's other valued perspectives to that team of supporters. And so families have incredible perspective about their family member or their loved ones. And how can we help families articulate their perspective, but at the same time realize it's their perspective, different than necessarily the perspective of the person. And sometimes it might be the only perspective that's communicated using words. However, mom's perspective on behalf of their child may or may not actually be what that child wants, right? And so to me, I always tell families to come use the family perspective tools, because just the way it's worded, it says, this is my perspective. So I would be filling it out. This is my perspective of my brother, Eric. And that's what it is. It's a perspective. And it's a gentle reminder that although my perspective is valued, it's still my perspective. But they intuitively, well, maybe it's not intuitively, but each box, you can kind of figure out what to put there. I think sometimes it's the order, but the order doesn't necessarily matter. But I like to start, like right up on the screen right now is the trajectory. And so you would think about doing this, like you would read a book and go left to right. I personally like to start with the vision. Where am I headed? What is sort of my overall vision? And write some thoughts down all the way on that right-hand side. And I think, especially for family members, the thing I like about this tool is really the what I don't want, because families fill that out completely because they know what they don't want, but they often don't know exactly what vision looks like. And so I get a lot of more detail from people of being able to say, well, I know I don't want this type of service, and I know I don't want them to live there, and I know I don't want this or that. And then I often jump over to like my past life experiences. Like now I kind of know where I'm headed. Now I need to kind of understand whether it's been the last year or their whole life. What are positive things and some things we never want to repeat again? And then that moves me into the next column where I'm able to say, now what goals do I want to work on? What's kind of our highest priorities? And so I think what we're starting to do is create tip sheets that will almost be like the instructions on ideas on how to fill this out. And again, there's no wrong order.
I think that this is a very intuitive form. I think almost everybody seems to understand it pretty quickly. And what I want to say about it is that it's so great. I've had so many families tell me how powerful it was for them to take this one piece of paper to their IEP meeting, to a conversation with a residential provider, to case management, and say, this is what we're looking for. This is what we've already tried. Here's what we don't want. It's really frames the conversation in such a great way for families.
I think so too. And, and that's why I think the use of it can be a lot of different ways, right? So for me, like that helps a family prepare prior to a meeting, and sometimes they may or may not even show it at that meeting, but it gave them the confidence to organize their thoughts prior to that meeting, or to like think about things, because, my parents, they always crack me up when they go to meetings for my little brother, because it seems like, and you never know which one it's going to be this way. One of them's going to be emotional, and the other one's going to have to like be the more analytical person, right? And so
could they take turns?
You do take turns, right? You don't know which, you don't know what's going to come up in those meetings when they're talking about your family member, or, and so sometimes, even prior to a meeting, just sort of jotting that stuff down. And again, you don't have to share it with anybody, but it helps you like be reminded. You could pull it out and be like, someone told me once, they think of life course as paper courage. It's the paper courage to be able to speak up at a meeting, and other families would rather actually pass them all out and say, it's all written down. I'm going to now go over it for you. And so sometimes you use it as an advocacy tool. And then other times you use it when you're just sitting down and you're stuck and you're like, I just need to brainstorm, and it helps you kind of problem solve yourself. Or the third way is it actually is the plan and guide that the team is using as a team to collectively plan. So there's lots of different ways to actually use the tools.
Yeah. And, I've seen a lot of the people who get our services use that for their own paper courage to take control of their meetings, whether that's just 5 minutes at the beginning that they want to choose their vision for their future, or really leading the whole meeting and walking through each section. So I think that's the other part of it, is that it gives you permission to do as much as you want to do, to speak up for yourself and to start where you are. And that's been so cool to be able to watch people. And they don't have to use the forms. We talk about that all the time. I've supported quite a few people lately who have put together these really rockin' vision boards. And it's all about their vision for the good life, but it's in a different format. And they're able to share that in a way that's really, really cool. This conversation is making me think about some of the partnerships we've got. And I think, families, I hope you all know that part of my motivation for investing in this is that my vision for the great life for families and individuals with disabilities is that you're not going to have to relearn a new language every time you change services, that you're not going to have to start over and tell your story over and over again, because the people that are connected in your lives have the same vocabulary, have the same principles, have the same knowledge. And so as you move from early childhood services into the school system, into the adult world, we're all using the same language. And so I know that we've been working for quite a long time with Special School District here in Missouri and St. Louis, also Department of Mental Health. Shelley, can you talk a little bit about some of those partnerships?
Yeah, and we've been talking a little bit about how we use these in terms of practice and working to support people's lives. But a lot of my work is really heavily involved in organizational change or policy change or that sort of cultural change. And, for me, it's like, there's little things like, not little, but I don't know if many of you have seen this folder, like without partners, it is about creating a language. And that's what Life Course across the country is doing. When we work in these other states, when I hear them start using words like integrated STAR, trajectory, vision for a good life, like you're like, okay, we're creating this language. And I remember like 10 years ago when we said, we're going to actually organize directories using the domains. And they're like, but hold on, where are you going to put services? And where are you going to put that? And I'm like, we're going to organize it by the way people think and talk using common language. We're not going to organize it by the way the government's organized, because we all know how well the government's organized, right? So if you think about the way we organize things, it should be like how people call. Hey, I need help with housing. Hey, I need help with what I do during the day or whatever. And so the Life Course domains have become that. And so kind of going back to what you're talking about in terms of partnerships, our former director, Bernie Simons, he was a huge proponent of self-determination, community integration, of family support. And so he partnered with us right when this was kind of even just not even a formalized framework yet, and said, how can we make things better for families across the lifespan in their role of supporting a person? And of course, also focusing on that person. And so he recognized that sounds little, but this folder, the Missouri Developmental Disability Council, Department of Education, these statewide organizations started to pass out the folders. And I used to laugh because I was like, wow, when I go to a transition fair now and every single table has this folder, I would hope as a family, they felt like at least the systems are trying to talk the same language, or at least to pass out the same things. But we also have a lot of local partners. So I'm from St. Louis, so I'm a little biased, and I have a lot of history with many of the partners prior to even working on the Kansas City side of the state. But it is really cool to watch a county sort of saturate what I would call with their partnership at the local level. And that's really happening in St. Louis, Springfield, Columbia, Kirksville. It's happening all over the state. But you're seeing that. You're seeing the early childhood providers. You're seeing them pass it on to the pediatricians. You're seeing them use it in school for, transition planning. And I think that creating that common language across service systems is the ultimate game, because I always said, like, really, why life course? Well, what do parents and people with disabilities say? I need information. I feel alone. I don't know how to navigate services. And so if we ourselves can get organized across our partnerships, that is what I think it creates the larger community level change that you're seeing. And so we have partners from schools. We work with the university over in St. Louis, for example. They just got a big post-secondary grant that we're partnering with the ARC on. And watching special school district, the Division of DD, the regional offices train their staff on this, I would hope creates that sort of network language that in the long run will help families navigate the services.
Yes, and if you have not participated in one of the ARC's planning forward groups, I do want to mention now, in some ways we don't market them as life course events, because why would we? But it's embedded in everything we're doing. So when we plan with families at all ages, we're going through each life domain and talking about where you see things happening when your social life, and how are you going to get there, and what are some of your concerns around safety and security. So we go through all of those things. We have existing groups for families that are older and contemplating what's going to happen with their family member when they're not around anymore. We have 2 different groups for families that have children leaving the school system and launching into adult life. And so those are really important. And starting February 1st, we have a group for families with young children that's already got a great list of people signed up. And they're going to be talking about some of those same things from the perspective of young children. So there are opportunities for you all to dabble in this and see if it has an impact on the quality of your life and your ability to get your message across to the people that are providing you with services.
Well, and those are awesome opportunities. And I think that points out for people, you asked that question, where do families go? And, I think there's a lot of organizations in our state and around the country that are starting to say, how are we embedding this in our existing family workshops? How are we embedding this in our self-advocacy work? How are we embedding it into the classroom to teach self-determination? And so you're starting to see what I would consider these island of excellences pop up around the country. And, that's where I think as an organization that we call the Life Course Nexus, our job is to figure out where are those innovative ideas? How can we share those with other organizations, other professionals, so that they then want to do that in their local communities? And I think that those workshops that you talk about are, the other underpinning of all of this is this phrase that I use called anticipatory guidance. And I always tell people, like, people are wanting a map of, I need this, I need that, my kid's this age, I need this and that. Well, that's really a service map, right? Those are options that you should make an informed decision about as your child changes ages or changes different eligibility types. But you really need sometimes you need help and nudging around anticipating what I consider life experiences. So instead of saying, what services are available to my 14-year-old, I should be thinking to myself, what are the life experiences that I want my child to have? Because the life experiences at 14 are those stepping stones to those other life stages. And so what you're doing in those groups is you're providing this group conversation around life experiences across the different domains so that you start expanding the possibilities of those experiences. And that's an awesome way to implement the life course.
It's also really fun when we have groups that include the person with the disability and the family and have each of them have space to have their voice heard and then bounce it back and forth. It's been very fun. And we had that exact experience yesterday. We were talking about community living for some kiddos that were still in their early teens, and what was important for them to start thinking about now. And in the case of these kids, they both were interested in cooking and kind of building their repertoire of skills in the kitchen. So that was a good place to start for the families. So it was really fun. All right, I have to stop because you used the fancy word nexus. And I know that's sort of a newer concept around Life Course. Can you go back and talk a little bit about what is this nexus? Why have you called it a nexus? What do you expect it to be?
We were starting to get calls for lots of like, how do I learn more about Life Course? What do I do with Life Course? And so we've formed a center inside the Institute for Human Development where I work that's very specific to, like, I would call it our National Life Course Center. But I didn't want to use the word center because I feel like we're connectors. I feel like we're this place to connect. And so a nexus is just a generic word. You're starting to see it used lots and lots of places. And the word nexus is sort of like the connector, the center of something that connects other things together. And whether it be connecting an organization to another organization, or a professional to other professionals, or families to families, or connecting anybody, any of our stakeholders to information or training. That's what the Life Course Nexus Center, so to speak, is. And so it's starting to become a more formal center where you can come and you can order resources. You could partner with us on research. You could say, I really, really want these materials in Spanish. And I'll say, well, great, let's partner on that. And let's get them on the website for everybody to use. And so it's just our name of our national center. But it was really important to me that people realized that we wanted to be the connectors. And so we used the word nexus to describe the Life Course nexus, is that it's a place where ideas are intersecting.
Yeah, it's been so fun to be involved with this, not from the very beginning, but from close to the beginning, and see the scaling up process and how you have to start thinking about things in a different way once other entities start to become involved. And I want to pick your brain for a second, because you do have the advantage of being able to talk to people all over the country and in different countries. Are there things that you see happening regarding supporting families that you think are cutting edge or important that we should know about? I'm throwing in a surprise question.
I think that's a really, really great question. And the really interesting part that I think is happening, and I think with this new administration, with the Biden administration, I think he has a particular pulse on the disability policy as well as aging policy. And I think that can only bode well for the disability community. And I think there's a real recognition, and I think COVID really helped amplify an issue we already knew was there, in that if we know that most people with developmental disabilities, 75% of them don't receive paid services. So that means they are being supported informally or with some types of supports, be it through a family member or other caregiver, or they're living on their own. And not always in a positive manner, or could be a very positive environment. And I think that the role of, we don't like to use this phrase in the disability field, family caregiver, but it is a recognized phrase by politicians. And so we need to jump on that bandwagon sometimes and get over that phrase, because we use the support phrase. But when we're talking about really national policy, it's the family caregiver policies we need to be focusing on. And nothing's changed in the 100 years of our service systems. families still need information. They still need peer support. They still need help navigating. Sometimes I could navigate a system or problem solve, and other times I just need somebody to help me do it. And so I think you're starting to see managed care organizations, Medicaid policies, start recognizing that the role of navigation, the role of an information referral staff, those shouldn't just be nice things that volunteers do and we scratch by. So hopefully you're starting to see different funding opportunities for those. It's still slim, but I see that that's starting to happen. There's a big focus on respite across the lifespan. You're also seeing the real recognition of community-based supports. And, you know, as we move to community-based supports, you can't ignore family support because who's really the coordinator? It's typically falls on a family member. But what do you do if there isn't a family member? So I think that this is a good time for family caregiving policy, different than it had been before.
Yeah, I can see some of that, and it's interesting for me to see that some states have embedded, like there's a family support waiver in their Medicaid policy. There's different mechanisms that people are using to deliver those kinds of services. So it's good to see your perspective on that.
So, you know, I guess I would say is that, you know, Sharon hosted us on the Life Course, about Life Course, but partnering with affiliate organizations like ARC is what really drives this work. And so, you know, we can formulate ideas and explore them and figure out how to support them. But it's really people like Sharon and those of you that joined us. How do we work together? And, watching different people kind of connect with us and then kind of just explore and take it different places has been the really fun part. So, you know, it's quite a privilege to see this happen across the country. And I'm just always so honored to hear the stories. I mean, hearing families talk about, how it's changed a conversation, or it's given them hope, or it helped them advocate for something. And that's what really drives the work. And, you know, that's really what we're ultimately in this for. But also seeing professionals and organizations recognize that this isn't, when a director calls me from a different state and says to me, I'm going to use this as organizational cultural change. That is really amazing. They're not calling just saying, how am I using this to plan with a family or a person? They're literally using it to say, we've got to transform our culture. And that is the scary part and the really exciting part for me. And we're walking a really fine line with that too, because what happens is it becomes a mandate. And a requirement. And I think we have to be really careful that people actually see it as a skill set and a way of thinking, that then the policies and procedures can support those, but you're not trying to mandate Life Course. You're trying to get people to believe in the principles and apply that to everything they do. And then how are our processes and our policies supporting those? So, that's what I want to share. I also want to share is that I'm open. I get emails. I will answer your emails. I try to be really responsive. I love new ideas. And I want people to always feel like, whether it's myself or the Nexus team, that we're approachable. You're not doing anything wrong. You're not going to get in trouble. And you don't have to be intimidated either. We love to partner. Sharon could probably speak to that.
It's always exciting and dangerous to partner with Shelley because she comes into the room with sort of an idea, but then it's just a big free-for-all. So it's very fun. And there's always a great outcome to somewhere down the road. So I highly recommend it. Yeah, I love working on all the different projects, and I feel like we're both driven by that same outcome, being able to see people that we care about who have disabilities and their families really take ownership of their lives and be able to say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, here's how I'm going to go about getting it, and helping build those skills. And yeah, I'm thrilled by it. So thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time today. It was really, really fun to talk with you.